In the last tutorial, we made a way so we can create rooms, and now in this one we'll be joining these rooms. First, I created a new scene, which will be for our gameplay. We're not going to use it that much this tutorial, because we're just going to be joining this room. As you can see, we have a simple UI here, which is only the left player label, the value, and the right player label and value. Also, we have a board for our game and a start game button. That's only it. As I mentioned last time, we created our create room, but if we go to our client code, we can see that on the success message that we were receiving, and when we send it to create the room, we're actually using the room name which is in our input field. This is correct only for our example for last time, but we would like to return the name for the room and then use that value to create our actual room. Also, the person who creates the room, he should not see the screen over here. When we are the host of that room, we should be redirected to the game scene, and everybody else that's in the lobby, he should see the new room created. Currently, it's only displayed to us, the host, so we're going to fix that. Let's go to our server, and as I mentioned, the first thing it will be to actually return a value to our room successful message, and this will be our room name. So we can just copy the values on top here, which are for the name of the room when we create it, and paste it over here. Now let's go to our plugin. Here last time we created our room object, but we don't have access to it currently. So we're going to change that. The same way we did with our player. When we create our player, we add it to a dictionary. We would like to do the same thing with the room. And it will be a very similar thing. We will just have a dictionary with integer key and a room value, and let's create it room ID to room. Now what we don't have here is our room ID, which we'll just create, and it's very simple. We can just create a simple integer and call it room ID and give it a value of 1. Now we would like every time we create a new room just to increment this value, so it's a unique ID. And inside our room we can pass here the ID for easier access if we just need it. As we know, this plugin is loaded only once, so when the server starts, everything here starts. So we will have room ID of 1, this will be the default. When we have our room ID, we can then set it to the dictionary we just created. Room ID to room, add, and then pass the room ID with the room value. Now as you can see here, we're passing the room ID from our room object because we are incrementing the room ID. So don't mistake that. If it's more clear for you, we can just put it here on the bottom. Now because we added a room ID, we would like one more value to be added to our success message, which will be our room ID value. This is because when we return the name, we would like to have room ID name. If we're a player that wants to join a room, we would like to send that room ID to the server, and that way we can figure out which room we want to join. Let's do the same thing. As I mentioned before, the order is very important, so just keep the order of the variables the same. The way we're sending currently our data from the server to the client is like this, and we would like to change that because currently we're not passing any parameters, but we want to. So what we can do is just set our create room successful message as a parameter and pass it from outside. We can just copy this and create our message over here. We know we want to have two values which we're returning, so let's just pass them. The name, which is our room.name, and the ID, which is our room.id. Also, we need to pass our parameter. Now what we're doing is, when we create the room, we're sending this message to our user that created that room, which we want to change because we want to send this message to everybody else but our user. And we're going to see why in a second. But in order to do that, we can do the following. We would like to send it to all the players that are not in that room, but currently we only have access to every player. It doesn't matter if it's in that room or not in it. So what we can do is go inside our player, our user model, and let's create a new variable here, which we'll just call room. Now this room will represent if we have joined a room, it will fill this value. So this way, when we iterate through our client ID to player, we can check if the player has been joining any rooms, is in the game, and if it's not, we can just send to that player because we know, hey, that player is in the lobby. Now let's create a new method and let's call it player join room. And then we'll just add a parameter which will be our user. And we would like to add to our user the room object. So let's pass the room object as well. So every time the user joins a room, we will add it to the user model, the room object to the user model. And we know that when we create a room, our host will for sure join that room. So let's just set the method over here we just created and pass the user value. And we know that we can get that user value just by accessing our client ID like this, and then pass the room value from the room we just created. Now, as I mentioned, the next step will be to just iterate to our client ID to player. As we have it over here, we can just copy it. Now we would like to create a variable of type room, and it will be our user room, which we can get from pair.value.room. And let's check if our room is equal to no. And if our room is equal to no, then that means the user has not joined any rooms and is in the lobby currently. And one more thing we need to change here is on create room successful, we would like to send it to all the users, as I mentioned, that are in the lobby, and currently we're sending it back to our client, which we can use, we can fix easily because we have access to our user. We can just tell him pair value.client, and that way we access our client for that specific user. Now when we've done that, we would like to take care of the player that actually created that room, and we know that when we create the room, we're actually joining that room. So let's create a new networking data, which will be the same as the create room successful one. So let's copy it, because when we join the room, let's rename it join room successful. When we join a room, we know that we want to have the room ID back to us, so we know what room we've joined. And maybe we can just keep the name if we want to know the name as well, but we have it locally, but just in case we can return it here as well. It's not a problem. The next part is to create a message request, which we'll be sending from the server to the client. The same way we have on create room successful. Let's just copy this and have on join room successful. Now we need to create a new tag, of course, which will be join room success. Let's give it a value. Now over here we can create our message, our join room successful message, which, as I said, it will be the same as our create room successful. So we can even just copy it over here and replace the values. Also, we can get the client from our user like this. One more thing we can do is create a new tag, which will be join room. Let's give it a value as well. And the join room success we're sending from the server to the client, but of course this is only when we are joining that room to say that we have joined it. We need one more tag, which will be our join room tag, which will send from the client to the server when our user wants to join a room. So let's go back here and create a new tag. I can just copy this and delete everything in it. That should be join room. We also need to create a new networking data, which will be join room, and we would like to have one parameter of type room ID. So the only thing we need to pass to our serializer, it will be only our room ID, so we know what we want to join. Then let's serialize it here. Let's just copy our player join room method and paste it over here. Now we need to add the room as a value, so we can easily do this by just accessing our room from room ID to room, and because we know the room ID from what we're sending, join room dot room ID. Of course, we can create a check if this exists. If our dictionary contains key, which is our join room ID, only then we're joining that room. Again, just in case, so the server doesn't crash if something happens. Let's build the project. Go back to our networking manager on the client side. Let's just restart our OmniSharp just in case, so we know that everything will load successfully here. And the first part we need to do is on create room success. We would like to fix what we passed last time, because we just changed it to have name and room ID. So we know we're passing here create room successful. Let's create a new variable, which will be from our reader serialize, and it will be of type create room successful. Now when we have access to what we're sending from the server, we know that we have name and room ID. In order to pass that, there are a couple of ways we can do it. Let's put a value in our set on create room success, which here we can pass both values separately, or we can pass it with create room successful, just the full class. And let's just call it message. Let's also set it over here as well and pass it like this. Now we just need to import from the bulb our multiplayer game models. Also, let's add it over here. Create room successful. Now when we're receiving everything in our create room component, we need to pass the parameter here, our message, which is create room successful. And again, add our models. Now when we're creating a room, let's just pass this as well. We access, the last time we accessed our room name from the input field, but as we know, we no longer have this here as a value because we're only sending create room successful to the users that are in the lobby and not to the user that's creating the room, because this is the correct way. And we are just typing message.name. The next thing we need to change here is when we're creating our room, we would like not only to have a name, but our room item component, we would like it to store our room ID. So let's create a new integer, which will be of type room ID. And instead of passing just the name, we'll pass the ID as well. So we can even create a new method, which will be public void set room, and we'll be passing both of them, because if we just want to make things more clear, then if we have set room like this, we can just pass the name and we can create a set ID, set room ID, which will take an ID, and then we can just set the room ID value to our ID, which will be of type integer. Okay, currently, now we just need to change from set room name to set room. And pass the ID as well. Now when we create our object, we have access to the room ID. So when we click on that room and we're in the lobby, we would like to join that room, then the next part will be to just send the message to the server. Now, as I mentioned, we would like to be able to click on the room item component. So let's create a new method, which will be on room click. Now, when we click on that room, we would like to join it. So we would like to send the room ID to the server. And in order to do that, we know that we are going to do everything inside our networking manager. So let's create a new method here, which again, it will be on room click, or even on join room click. Now let's create our join room. And we know that our join room has a room ID, which will be passing from outside. Let's change the tag to join room and pass our join room here. The next step is we need to access this on join room click. We're going to be doing it the same as on create room. We can even just move it over here, and if you want to keep everything this similar, we can just set callback in front of the join room click. Now let's go to our global callbacks, and we can just copy this and change everything. Instead of name, we're sending an ID. On join room. As I mentioned, we're going to be working with delegates a lot in these tutorials because they're just so good. Let's go to our networking manager and do the same thing as we did with our on create room, but this time is on join room. Let's pass our callback on join room click. And the same thing over here, but with a minus. Now we want, when we click on our on room click, we just access our callbacks and set on join room. Then pass our room ID over here. So when we click on that room, this will be triggered and we're going to send our message to the server. The next part will be to receive our join room successful, which we created over here, and it will contain again our name and room ID. So let's copy our create room success and just access our join room success. Now let's create a new global callback, which will be the same as the create room success. And we change our message to join room successful. Oops. Okay. Let's go back here in our networking manager and pass the correct values. Currently we know that our create room component exists inside our lobby. So we have two options: to create our callback for the join room success over here, or create a new component and create it over there. But because we know we have it in our lobby, we can just use this one in our case. Let's just access our on room success callback. And create a new method with our message. Now what we want to do when we join that room is just load our game scene. Import our scene manager and load our scene. Again, our scene is game, so we're just loading it like this. Let's go back to our room prefab, and inside the button click event, we would like to add from our room item component our own room click. Now let's save. Let's go back to our server, something we've missed. is on the join room, we have to change our tag here. Let's save. Let's build our solution. Let's open up our server and create 2 clients. Let's log in. Now on the top one, we're going to be creating the room, and it should join us in that room, and on the bottom one, it should just display this room over here. So let's do that. Let's call it test room. Create. As you can see, we're being joined here in the game scene. And when we focus on this window, because we were not focused, as you can see, it didn't update. But when we focus, we can see the test room appears, and when we click on the test room, it joins us to that room as well. Well, that was it for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for more.